Hi, and welcome to Drones Down Under podcast. Ty, Danny, welcome.
Howdy.
Danny.
So today we're talking about how to charge for drone services. So we recently talked about monetizing your drone. So we obviously talked about some of the services you can do. And now we're going to obviously chat about how we actually charge and share some of our trade secrets.
And we're not talking about how to charge your batteries.
That's right, Danny. I knew you had to get that one out.
I
was put it in there.
I was itching.
He had to.
You feeling better now?
I'm much better. Continue.
Great. Oh God, yes. Here's a commercial conversation with Danny.
You're never getting anything serious out of me.
Okay, so where do we get started, gents? I'm going to hand over to you. So what are we going to start with?
Right. First off the bat, simplicity is key. Don't offer complex services when we had your drone for 2 weeks. Offer taking some photos. That's the easiest thing.
Yeah.
Learn how to crawl, then stand, then walk.
Yeah,
it's a good one. Like that one.
Just definitely keeping it simple is a good idea.
That should be on
great.
I was going to say it should be right under that mole media, Danny.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple.
No, I'm a back that says stay. I'm a back that says stay classy.
Stay classy. Very nice.
Stay classy, but keep it simple. But yeah, no, keeping it simple is definitely a good way to go. And having specialties as well, specializing in one or two specific services helps also narrow it down a little bit better. And also, you tend to excel when you focus on something as well, rather than being a generalist, which is always good.
Well, both of you've got such a long background in photography. You've obviously developed that craft over a number of years. You now can use that in this industry on specific services, right? So that's
correct.
I think what we're saying is leverage what you might have in your background.
Yes.
Obviously, you're in a fortunate position. But there's obviously other people in the drone industry that have photography backgrounds, right? So
yeah, well, that's what we've always said since the beginning of this podcast. It's don't be a jack of all trades. Find your niche and stick to it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
And okay, so we're going to offer some services. We're going to specialize in one or two. What's next?
Well, developing your skills. Developing skills in whatever facet of the industry you want to focus on, whether that is keeping it more to the creative of doing more images and video, or whether that is starting to look at things like asset inspection or survey and mapping if you want to go into something a little bit more challenging. But either way, there is heaps of content out there to help you learn. And this is not an industry that you can jump in tomorrow and expect that, okay, I'm going to pick up a controller and everything's just going to go perfectly fine. You'll need to learn. You need to in everything you do in life, but with our industry, you definitely need to keep learning. So no matter what your interest is and where you want to go, there is heaps out there. YouTube's full of videos. There's heaps of stuff you can read.
Here's a pretty good podcast out there as well.
I was going to say, Ty, what the hell are you doing, mate? There's nothing else on YouTube.
Guys to teach you. No, but genuinely though, there's a lot of information out there, and also just asking people in the industry. You will get some people who will tell you absolutely nothing, but you'll get others too that are happy to share knowledge and help steer you in the right direction, or if you have some questions you want to ask. Yeah,
no, definitely, and obviously as you get more involved in the industry, definitely build a network. So we talked about specific services. Now, equipment wise, what are your thoughts there?
Whatever gear you've got, leverage it. Whether it be a Mavic Mini and a pocket camera of some sort, use whatever gear you've got to build your own portfolio.
Yeah,
you don't need to go out and spend $30,000 in an M300 and P1 when you've got a Phantom sitting behind you.
Yeah,
that's the thing. Like the tools of the trade are one thing. It is also your skill set as well. You don't necessarily always have to have the top of the range, most expensive drone to be able to produce amazing imagery and footage, and or depending what you want to do with it. You can there's quite a good handful of semi entry level drones which you can start doing survey and mapping with now, and inspection as well. So you don't always have to have the top dollar in equipment, but it's true. Use what you have.
Yep, and I've seen quite a few models Danny's done with the Mini. So when anyone says
Well,
it's not a great drone, it's good for photography, I think maybe we show you some of his
Right.
models.
Perfect example. The job I did only last week. We had the M300 on site and the Mavic Mini. Not excuse the language. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference in the models. Mind you, I had to get a lot closer with the Mini, and you just work with what you've got. But it's how you use it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about hourly rate versus fixed. So I'm going to give you something, obviously, from an example perspective. So 1 hour, half a day, and full day. So if we say an hourly rate of, say, $100, half day being 4 hours, $400, and then $800 for a full day. How would we sort of charge? Like, how do we get that $100? Like, what are the types of things that we need to consider? And the reason we're kind of going through this exercise, we've touched on real estate in quite a few of our episodes, and we've had people that might charge $50, $100 to do a job. So I wanted you guys to break down $100 an hour. It seems maybe a lot for some of the services you might do starting out.
Yeah.
But can you just break down where that $100 could go to?
Well, mate, the first thing you do is you're looking at it. You're like, oh wow, $100 an hour is great money. Hey, not really. Once you break that down.
And I think everyone, when they start to, does that exact action. I think, I think I did it when I started photography. Oh yeah, cool. Charge X amount an hour, and then you don't think about everything that needs to be included in that cost.
Exactly.
Well, so when you're looking at the simple things from your equipment, your insurance and registration, travel, people, staff. What else is there, Danny?
Well, if you look at the last episode, if anyone listened to our last episode we did, drone registration alone is $40 per drone. That's $60 left on your profit margin there. Plus your equipment, you've paid $1,000 plus for your drone. Equipment, if you take that percentage out, you've got take $5 out. Plus then you've got your electricity, you've got hard drives, you've got software. Like by the time you really whittle it down, that $100 you've just charged for a hour on site, you're making $10 on it.
And software is a big one that I think people forget to, and we can all relate to this because we're all the same. You don't think about how many subscriptions and stuff that you need to do everything that you do. There is a lot of costs.
Just think about how many Netflix subscriptions you have, or Netflix, or Disney, whatever. That's the same with software. There's so many of them, they all add up. When you just wanted to watch one TV show, turns out you've just paid $100 a month. It's the same with software, just times 10.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that $100 an hour is really not looking enticing anymore.
Yeah. So I think it's easy to say, well, okay, we can charge $200 an hour, $300 an hour, but obviously the market's going to be part of that conversation of what you want to charge. But I think it's important to know, don't think if you charge $100, you think it's only 4 photos to go and do a real estate aerial job. Don't think it's just $100, because like Ty just said, software, but it's Adobe, you're paying a subscription. You need to consider that cost part of your job. You might say like Danny said, use some of the drones you have, don't go buy something, but you have to put a cost of that. So you might have a laptop that costs $2,000. You need to put a percentage of that into the rates of your cost.
Well, I mean, you even straight up need to think about even just as simple as the hours. I mean, to go and do a simple, cheap RE job, you still got to drive there. You still got to drive back home or to the office. You still have to spend that time then editing those photos. Or even if you have external editors, you then have to pay them to do those photos. So all those things through that whole process are costing you something. They're either costing you money or time. And it was an exercise I did when I had to review my pricing for my photography business, because I just was like, I'm not really where I should be going. I'm basically losing money. And to sit down and break it down into every tiny little cost and time, I still recommend everyone does that who owns a business at some point, because even the ones that are very, I guess, cost and budget savvy will find stuff that they didn't think about before. And you do need to think about it, or you will sell yourself short.
Yeah. So we've talked a little bit about how to calculate your hourly rate, what to consider. From a fixed price or quote, how can you sort of protect yourself from that?
Well, it's a tough one. I guess you need to add on to those prices a fixed buffer essentially. So, you know, what if, dare I say, if you're charging $100 an hour, add on the extra 30%. You know, would that allow enough buffer for the variables in life?
Yeah, the variables, like simple things is, you know, and we've all come across them, particularly with our industry, weather, things like that can push out jobs, and whether you may be halfway through a job and then you'll have to stop and then you'll have to actually finish it on another day. All those kind of things, and especially in the drone industry, you need to have a contingency there. If you're doing a job with no contingency, I'm guaranteeing you're going to lose money somewhere.
Well, here's a little example of that as well. I've got some friends that have recently done a line of sight survey. They traveled interstate, got out to the site with a 50-kilometer link, and the weather was. They've traveled interstate for a day trip and had to come back later. That's a few $1,000s out of your own pocket. If you didn't have those leeways in your budget, well, you'd be out of pocket for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And the client's not going to pay for you to go back just because you haven't done the job.
No, it's not a good, and you're not likely to hold on the client if you keep adding costs all the time.
Exactly.
So, I think sort of that 10 to 30 is a good buffer. Obviously depends on whether that's going to price you out if there's other people quoting, so you got to take that into consideration. Clearly the best thing to do is to quote hourly or day. And I've seen quite a few people seem to discount when they do a day rate, and I've never understood that. It's like you have a fixed cost. Like if you're charging somebody out, your wages are fixed. You don't pay somebody less for 8 hours when they're doing a job for you. So you shouldn't be discounting your daily rate.
Yeah.
Multi-day, sure.
Agree.
But again, just keep in mind, you're hiring someone to do a job, or yourself, you're paid $40 an hour, $30 an hour. The rate is the rate. So you shouldn't be discounting it. The reason we're highlighting these things is because we don't want our industry going to the gutter when it comes to what we charge. We want to protect everything that we build. We certainly don't need to take advantage of people. There's plenty of market, but we have to be smart on how we price things. And most people seem to think it's highly competitive. It's not. It's because people don't understand how to value their time.
Yeah. And just that across the board. I mean, that's not just our industry. It's people do struggle a lot with pricing, and they do sit there and they do think that, knocking a few bucks off here and there, but 100% what Sean's saying, you have to think about everything involved with your business. I see it all the time, and everyone will see it on social media, especially if you're a drone pilot or a photographer or anyone like that out there, when people post up jobs on social media, and then people basically quote for the job in the comments. It's the best example of people fighting to the bottom. And it's horrible, and it devalues the industry. It devalues what we do. It requires skill sets to do what we do. Not everyone can do it. Everyone can have a crack, but not everyone can do it. And you need to charge for that. Otherwise, you just constantly will leave yourself out in the cold.
Yep.
Perfectly
So
said.
talking about charging for that, what's another thing we can consider when we're trying to price up the job?
It's providing a written quote straight off the bat. That way you've got a paper trail of everything's been said. I personally I'll never quote over the phone. I'll quote over an email, so that way everything is in writing. They can't come back and say, exactly. The client come back to you and say, you said you're going to charge this. I'll be like, read the email, mate.
Yeah.
It's also worth asking your client what their budget is as well.
Yeah.
That's
Depending on the
And-
job, obviously. I mean, there's plenty of jobs that it's a straightforward, simple charge out, but for particularly a lot of bigger stuff, it's definitely been worth being across. Not to necessarily charge them their full budget, but it's more to work out whether they to match their expectation and price. End of the day, you don't want someone going into a $20,000 job thinking it's worth $2,000. So it's more about that than looking after yourself.
A good way of when you're asking like what their budget is as well, you can also customize what your offering is. If they come back to you and say, oh, you're too expensive, you ask what's their budget. If their budget's slightly under, well, you're like, well, okay, maybe I can remove the video portion of this segment or a lower resolution capture or something to accommodate for it. That way they're getting the product and you're still getting the job in the end for a reasonable rate.
Definitely. There's always room to bargain in that sense.
Exactly.
Not necessarily bargaining on your time, but
exactly
bargaining on other stuff. So
and again, like if you look at the two of you, you're very experienced photographers. You got a lot of equipment, a lot of experience. You're not going to go after certain types of jobs, and your time is money, and quoting takes time. So I think people forget that. It's like, well, I'll give a quote and I'll do 10 quotes today, but we should get 3 or 4. But it's time, and especially in the drone side of things, you have to look at airspace. You have to look at the safety component. There's a whole bunch of things that lead into before we get on site.
There's a good hour or two in a quote, depending on what it is. It can be quite a lot of time go into it.
Like even just to write up a SWIMS, JSA, and risk assessment, or if you need to do a CASA application, there's another 10 hours on top. You might spend a whole day on just doing an airspace application, which that definitely adds up.
So I think it's a great reason to ask if the customers, well, that's a bit intrusive. You shouldn't be asking my budget. Well, this is a justification of why you're asking it. So workflow, we've done the whole provide a written quote. What else can we do?
Have some terms and conditions to back you up at the bottom of your website or in the bottom of an email. Have that small fine print that everyone should read. Having your payment terms, your cancellation policies, your limitations due to weather, things like that. Like in the end, you are a business. You need to us.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, Ty talked about, you might have wet weather, you have to drive, come back again. Yes, your policy might say we have the entitlement to charge you, but I guess that's what you got to decide whether that's something on a charge again. But if you have it called out, then you don't have a problem with your customer.
Yeah, and the other thing is making sure you grab a deposit. That sort of helps you too with costings. Not every job you'll require that. I know in my photography business, I used to keep it to the bigger jobs, but generally because the bigger jobs have costs, and like you said, Sean, if you have to come back on site for whatever reason, that's going to cost you going back out there and things like that. So you do need to think about that when you're quoting up for bigger jobs as well, because you don't know what can happen and you don't want to leave yourself in the dark.
No, it's a very good point. So I think we touched on, I guess, the whole T's and C's. Probably a good one is get yourself a good lawyer to prepare those terms. Don't borrow your mate's T's and C's. In my view, I think it's worth investing some money when you see the right time.
You sound like you have a good lawyer on hand, Sean. Is there anyone you could recommend?
I'm glad you asked, Danny. Well, I think we all know we're very good advocates of Tom Pills. So the drone lawyer, I think, is a great start. Have a chat to Tom and see whether he's the type of guy you want to work with. And he's quite experienced in the industry. So reach out to him. It's not cost you to have a conversation with him. And
the man's a wealth of knowledge. And if you've got anything you're unsure about, particularly in the drone aviation law side of things, he is the man to talk to. So
and hopefully you don't need to use his services other than the contract.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not.
Cool. Anything else we want to touch on as far as charging?
Charge those batteries. Get them in the air.
Charge the batteries.
Start the
Just
episode and
can't
finish
let
the
it go.
episode. No.
Just can't let it
Yeah.
go.
Awesome.
Well done.
Cool. So that pretty much wraps up this episode. So don't forget to subscribe. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. Really love your support, and I think we're really proud. It's been a year now, and we're loving it. So please send in any requests that you have, so we can actually table that as an episode for you for any topics you want us to cover off.
And you'll find
So
us
until
on
the next
socials
one.
as well. Don't forget that, Sean. Socials as well. Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. We're all there.
Beautiful.
All over it.
Thank you, gents. Great
Take it easy,
insight.
guys.
Appreciate the time.
Take it
Till the
easy.
next
one.
Bye.